Welcome back to Inclusive Design 24 2020, brought to you in partnership with our Platinum supporters, Barclays Access and Adobe, our Gold supporters, Intopia, Tetralogical, and InfoAxia, and our Silver supporters, Intuit and WebAble. You can follow us on Twitter at ID24Conf, and if you have questions for the presenters, tweet them using the ID24 hashtag for our QA at the end of the session. Q&A, a little different than QA. And you can also pipe questions into the YouTube chat. A reminder that ID24 is a respectful community. You can find our code of conduct on the inclusivedesign24.org event site. Normally, I would have Hiddy hand off here for the introduction, but I'm going to take this because I want to give a huge thanks to Bruce for stepping in at almost the literal last minute to cover for a cancellation. We are thrilled to have his talk regardless. We think you will be too. This is going to be awesome. So coming up, we have Bruce Lawson presenting, I've forgotten your talk name. What a great sign for me.
Called Whose Web Is It Anyway?
Thank you, Bruce.
Am I on?
You are on.
Great. Hi, folks. As Rosie just said, I didn't know I was going to be doing this until 46 minutes ago. So that's my way of apologizing if it's completely shambolic and I lose my thread, because I've just literally added some slides. First of all, a big thanks to my lovely client who gave me time off at the last hour of the last day of a really important sprint to step in. So Fred, you're a mensch. Thanks, man. Yeah, my talk is not specifically about accessibility. It's part of it, but it's more of a think piece about who the web belongs to, how it got to where it is today, where it's going, things that we need to keep an eye on, and some perhaps suggested solutions. So let me see if I know how to press all the magic buttons and share the screen. Screen sharing failed to start. Maybe one of the organizers needs to give me permission to share my screen.
You should have that permission. Let me just double check.
Talk amongst yourself, folks.
You should be able to. It's showing everything green here at my end.
It's saying screen sharing has failed to start. Please try again later. Right, well, I know some jokes.
Let me just...
Honestly, Pat, you've had such an easy day up until now. Okay, it says now I'm sharing my screen. Do you see that, Pat?
Yes.
We see it.
Great. Just wanted to check, because you know what it's like presenting on your own in your darkened room. Yeah, whose web is it anyway? You can see I've carefully and skillfully photoshopped the word web over the word line from the old BBC sitcom. I am Bruce. How do I advance my screen? There we are. I'm Bruce Lawson, and I'm an HTML-aholic. This is actually a fashion brand in a department store in Tokyo. And when I was at a W3C meeting over there, Mike T.M. Smith insisted I go into this mall. The guy who invented this fashion brand used to be a web developer, apparently. So it's HTML, world standard, me lying on the floor looking winsome in front of the banner, just before some rather bewildered security guards came up and politely asked me what the heck I was doing. So that's me. I used to work with Patrick at Opera. I've known Adrian for donkey's years with web accessibility, and I bang on about stuff. This, conversely, is a bunch of hippies, and a bunch of hippies is probably a reasonably good way to describe the people who founded the early web and the principles upon which the early web functioned, which have a great deal of impact on how it functions today. King of the hippies is this bloke. Yes, it's Sir Uncle Timbo, as I like to call him, Sir Timothy to you, of course. Sir Uncle Timbo, as you know, invented the web when he was at CERN, and went up to head W3C, the World Wide Web Consortium, who until recently set all of the standards for HTML. After HTML5, that went to the WHATWG, the Web Hypertext Applications Technology Working Group. They were the people who really kicked off HTML5 because W3C had given up, literally had given up, and wanted everything to be XML. So the WHATWG was a loose, unofficial meeting of minds, excuse me, from people at Opera, Ian Hickson, people at Mozilla, people like Dave Barron, Maciej Stachowiak from Apple. Then Hicksy moved to Google, and Chris Wilson, who was at Microsoft, the lead developer for IE, joined in. And it's always been said that WHATWG, the people who decide what go into web browsers, is a consortium of browser vendors. Yes and no. There have been a lot of people working on standards and implementing things in browsers. A good friend of mine from our Opera days, Florian Aurevoal, has been an invited expert financed by Bloomberg, the money people, because they wanted things in HTML, and Florian has argued and got things added to specifications, not necessarily because browser vendors were controlling it, but because Bloomberg wanted it. A group called Igalia, an open source collective also of hippies, including the man known to millions as the George Clooney of web standards. I refer, of course, to Brian Cardell. Igalia have implemented many, many things in Chrome, in Firefox, and in WebKit, paid for by organizations who wanted those standards in, but it wasn't necessarily a priority for the browser vendors. Pretend you didn't see this slide, because I should have only come on now, but I was jumping the gun. But it had always been really that it was great standards people and browser vendors who decided what went into specs and what went into browsers. Until a few years ago, when me and a group of nice people like Matt Marquis, Marcos Caceres, Simon Peters, and Tab Atkins got together and sort of co-invented the responsive images picture element and co-opted Apple's proprietary source set attribute to allow us to deliver responsive images. And this was spec'd completely outside the WHATWG and completely outside the W3C. And even more than that, it got financed by a crowdfunding. A developer called Yoav Weiss, who was a freelancer and now, of course, is at Google. He did a crowdfunder so that we could pay him to take 3 months off client work and write the C++ that went into Blink and WebKit. And this was the first time that had happened. Igalia, of whom I spoke before, the open source hippies in Spain and dotted all around the world, they've launched something called open prioritization. And this is, as it says on the screen, an experiment in crowdfunding prioritization of new feature implementations for web browsers. There are lots of things that are, you pledge some money to the one you most want to see implemented, and the one that meets its target, and they've calculated the person hours it would cost them to implemented this. The one that reaches its target, they will implement, and it will go into browsers ASAP. I think it's a really interesting experiment. So I urge you, if you have a few quid or dollars or rupees or whatever your currency of choice is, if you have a few of them to spare to contribute to the web, go to Igalia.com/open-prioritization, misspelt with a Z there, and pledge some money, or at least have a look and spread the word. And if your organization really wants one of those things to happen, maybe consider corporate donation. I need to clear my throat, but I can't find the mute button. Sorry. Anyway, back to Sir Uncle Timbo. There was an interesting newspaper article. Sir Uncle Timbo went to court, not that he'd done anything wrong. He went as an expert witness in the case of Aeolus. This was arguably a patent trolling organization that claimed that activating embedded dynamic content automatically infringed a patent of theirs, and they sued Microsoft for damages, got 500 million US. This is back in the early years of this century, and it was appealed. And one of the things Sir Uncle Timbo was asked at the court case was by Jennifer Doan, a Texarkana lawyer representing Yahoo and Amazon, led the questioning. And she said, when Tim Berners-Lee invented the web, did he apply for a patent on it? No, said Sir Uncle Timbo. Doan replied, and who owns the web? And Sir Uncle Timbo said, we do. That's in Wired. One of the other things that's founded the web that we know it today is something called Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act. Obviously, this is in the US, and this was pretty much the 26 words that created the internet. So I'm going to read those 26 words to you. No provider or user of an interactive computer service shall be treated as the publisher or speaker of any information provided by another information content provider. This basically says that if somebody publishes something on your site, with user-generated content rather than hacking, you are not responsible as a publisher for that information. And of course, this has led to people not worrying about comments on their blogs. It's led to things like Facebook, Twitter, social media as we know it. This was actually put in to protect platform owners from accusations of censorship. It was argued by a lawyer called Mike Godwin. Yes, he of Godwin's law, that the longer a conversation goes on, the likelihood of somebody comparing somebody else to Hitler reaches one. And he wrote an article recently called "Did the Early Internet Activists Blow It?" And he was a very early internet activist for the Electronic Freedom Foundation. Here he is, looking cheerful. He was co-counsel in Reno versus ACLU, a constitutional challenge to the Communications Decency Act. Basically, the Communications Decency Act tried to outlaw legal, but arguably immoral or indecent pornography. And he said that the one thing that survived from that act, the Section 230, was designed to empower internet companies to remove offensive, disturbing, or otherwise subscriber alienating content without being liable for whatever else their users posted. The idea was that companies might be afraid to censor anything because in doing so, they would take on responsibility for everything. And Mike Godwin goes on to say another thing, one thing that he believes he got wrong was we didn't anticipate how large platforms would rise to dominate their markets. Back in the 1990s, We thought that 1,000 website flowers would bloom. And no single company would be dominant. I believe that the early internet activists, being massive hippies, believe in what we might call the wisdom of the crowd, that the crowd is full of cheerful, lovely people, and together it's wiser than any one of those individuals. Sorry, I needed a cough break there. This is what happens when Patrick Lauker won't let you take your pre-presentation cigarette. The idea of the wisdom of the crowds was, it's been around since Aristotle, who's pretty old, but it became scientifically popularized by this elegant young chappie, Sir Francis Galton, a Birmingham lad like myself. He was attending some agricultural fair back in the 1830s, in which people were invited to guess the weight of a slaughtered and skinned cow, and whoever guessed closest won. And he speculated that if you took the arithmetic mean of everybody's guess, that would come within 1% of the actual weight, and it was even closer than that. So that's popularized the idea of the wisdom of the crowds. But unfortunately, I think what Galton didn't anticipate is what I like to call the malice of the mob. I think we all know that crowds aren't necessarily inherently wise. Here is a picture of quite a few of the Tetralogical and Paciello group people at a meetup earlier this year. Galton died in the early years of the last century, but I like to think that this is a picture of him late in life, looking at YouTube comments and rather regretting his idea that the crowd was inherently wise. But anyway, we move on. We know, for example, that when Myanmar, or Burma, as we might call it, got onto the internet, there was a massive explosion in Facebook use from people who'd never been on the internet before. In Myanmar, basically, Facebook is synonymous with the internet. So there's people who didn't understand that social media was, that somebody saying something on social media, it may not be true, for example. And Facebook was, unfortunately, like RTLM in the Rwandan genocide, arguably complicit in the Rwandan, the genocide of the Rohingyas, which led 700,000 people to flee the military in Myanmar over the border to Bangladesh. Just yesterday, I read this article. "I have blood on my hands," said a Facebook whistleblower. "I found multiple blatant attempts by foreign national governments to abuse our platform on vast scales to mislead their own citizenry and cause international news on multiple occasions. I've personally made decisions that affected national presidents without oversight and taken action to enforce against so many prominent politicians globally that I've lost count." That was quoted in BuzzFeed yesterday. I'll post the slides online later, by the way, in case anybody wants these links, in case anybody's still watching and haven't fallen asleep. One of the VPs at Facebook circulated this memo internally. "So we connect more people. That can be bad if they make it negative. Maybe it costs a life by exposing someone to bullies. Maybe someone dies in a terrorist attack coordinated on our tools. And still we connect people. The ugly truth is that we believe in connecting people so deeply that anything that allows us to connect more people more often is de facto good. It is perhaps the only area where the metrics do tell the true story as far as we are concerned." Now, I don't particularly have a problem personally with this. Terrorist attacks can be coordinated through mobile phones, but nobody blames Nokia or Vodafone. Crimes could have been planned by the telephone, but Alexander Graham Bell shouldn't be held to account. But the trouble with this is this statement from Facebook is that it smells very much like this to me. If in case you don't understand, that's hypocrisy. It smells very much of hypocrisy. And to illustrate my point, I want to tell you the story about Vladimir Putin's communist nipples. And Vladimir Putin's communist nipples earned me a ban from Facebook 2 weeks ago. Now, a little while ago, there was a meme, a post on Twitter with a headline saying that the new Russian COVID vaccine has proven to have no side effects. And somebody had photoshopped on a pair of boobs onto one of those topless pictures of Putin. And because I'm 10 years old, this amused me and I retweeted it, and that was fine. And then I thought, for the people I know who aren't on Twitter, like normal people who are not techs, I put it on Facebook. And within about 2 minutes of me posting it, I got an automated ban. The Mark Zuckerberg rode into town and told me that I had broken Facebook's content guidelines. And I thought, okay, it's boobs. Vladimir Putin used to be a KGB agent and used to be a devoted communist. So what's the symbol of communism? So I photoshopped red stars onto his pretend boobs. Banned again. Now, I couldn't understand this because, number one, it's boobs. And number two, it's on Putin and it's obviously a joke. So I had a look in Facebook's policy. Then I was talking about this with my daughter, who's a tattoo artist, and she shared this picture. This was also banned from Facebook. This is a woman practicing a tattoo on her boyfriend's leg, and it looks like a nipple, but it's a tattoo. And this woman specializes in tattooing false nipples onto women who've had mastectomies or cancerous lumps removed, who want their breasts to look, more like they did before. And of course, she's practicing. Who wouldn't want a nipple on their leg? But this was banned by Facebook too. It got so, excuse me, so ridiculous that they had a protest and they floated this giant boob outside Facebook HQ in London. Now, 10-year-old me enjoyed this very much, but it did lead me to wonder what Facebook's policies were. So I had a look. Do not post uncovered female nipples except in the context of breastfeeding, birth giving, and afterbirth moments, health-related situations, for example, post-mastectomy, breast cancer awareness, or gender confirmation surgery, or an act of protest. So the nipple on the leg is evidently should be allowed. I also note there's an interesting get out clause from anything here. You're not allowed to post a visible anus or fully nude close-up of buttocks unless photoshopped on a public figure. I wish to announce right now that I am not a public figure. What also interests me is that it's only female nipples. Male nipples are fine. And they obviously have some algorithm that is looking just at the boobs, because Vladimir Putin is certainly all man. That's why he posts so many pictures of himself doing rugged and manly things. So it must be something actually about the nipples themselves, but I don't know, and I digress. It's also interesting to me that content meets the definition of sexual activity unless any of the following conditions exist. The content was posted in a satirical or humorous context. Now, I think that my stolen picture of Vladimir Putin's communist nipples was obviously satirical and I thought humorous, but you might be mature. But anyway, what is it that makes Facebook so scared of breasts? There are people who culturally don't wear a top at all. Women who don't wear a top at all. Should their selfies be banned? Why should it be banned? The World Wide Web is designed to connect people across the world. It is not a vehicle for puritanical Californian prudes to export their social mores around the world. Basically, if nipples revolt you more than Nazis do, you're part of the problem, Facebook. And I want to thank the stock photography models for actually painting that sign and standing up in front of it. Now I want to change tack entirely and talk about another threat to the health of the internet. And this one actively could make life a lot worse for assistive technology users. ABP is Adblock Plus. It is owned and run by a company called IO, who hail out of Germany. And they have been subject to many, many lawsuits from people who believe that Adblock Plus shouldn't be allowed to block advertising because it's depriving them of revenue. I have skin in the game. I was working at Opera when Opera introduced the first built-in ad blocker into a major browser. And I thought it was largely a good thing because ads were so intrusive to users and consumed so much bandwidth and got so much tracking that it was obviously a consumer service. But anyway, they're being sued by Axel Springer, who's a big media organization in Germany. I believe they own Bild newspaper, amongst many others. The lawsuit, the claim is that ABP changes the programming code of websites in order to block inventory, and that this is illegal and infringes publisher copyright. Quote, advertising blockers change the programming code of websites and thus directly access the legally protected offer of publishers. Klaus-Hendrik Söring, head of media law at Axel Springer, told the German site of Heise or Heise. I managed to get hold of some of the documents written by Springer's expert witnesses, translated into English. Thank you to my mole. And this is really absurd. We spent a lot of time on the Twitters arguing that HTML and CSS is real programming, basically to prove that HTML and CSS are programming languages worthy of being used skillfully and not just loads of React stuff vomiting out divs. But this is a real troublesome definition of HTML as a programming language. This is what their expert counsel said. Compared to the original version of HTML, to which many statements still refer with respect to the property of a program, HTML5 shows many characteristics of a programming language, such as concrete control statements. For example, these control statements or commands cause the user with a browser to at least maintain certain priorities when processing programs. Block, i.e. immediately now, default, only at the very end, defer, or parallel, async. This means that the requirements for a computer program, such as those mentioned in the response to claim, are met. In other words, the HTML5 in inverted commas attributes on the script element, such as defer and async, mean that HTML5 is a programming language. And in Germany, case law defines a computer program as a sequence of commands which, when recorded on a machine readable medium, are capable of causing a machine with information processing capabilities to display, execute, or achieve a specific function or task or a specific result. In other words, Springer are suing ABP because ABP are breaking their copyright on computer programs. Now, why does this matter? Well, I don't know about Germany. I don't know if Germany has this highly diverse legal people that we see in England. alt, there are lots of middle-aged white men in glasses, in wigs, not a woman or BME person in sight. But the trouble is we all know that the law, and particularly very, very old Oxbridge educated white guys in wigs, don't necessarily get technology. And if it's ruled in Germany and perhaps elsewhere that ABP cannot block scripts that pull in ads, or cannot use CSS to hide ads, etc., that means, for example, what about virus scanners? If I put a website that I know has malware on it, are you legally allowed to block it? Because after all, it is my copyrighted programming code. And what about user style sheets? What about browsers going into high contrast mode? What about prefers reduced motion? If I, as an evil web developer, have put loads of flashing and animation-y stuff in, should a browser be allowed to block that? I think, of course, yes, it should. But this, if the court finds in Axel Springer's favor, this could actually become illegal. There is a long and quite glorious history in browsers of browser interventions, so much that the Web Incubator community group has started to document them, because the W3C word for a browser is it's a user agent. It is an agent working for you, the user. It doesn't exist to deliver pixel perfect, absolutely what the developer intended. It's designed to allow you as a user to access the content in whichever format best works for you. The WICG interventions spec says, over the course of its existence, the web has accumulated a multitude of standards and common patterns. While most of these are beneficial for both developer and users, if abused, intentionally or otherwise, web APIs can sometimes be a detriment to user experience. An intervention is when a user agent decides to deviate slightly from a standardized behavior in order to provide a greatly enhanced user experience. Because of its nature, it must be done sparingly and with extreme prudence. So think pop-up blockers, pop-under blockers, things that block autoplay in Flash, browser extensions that refuse to autoplay video or audio, browser extensions that stop animations or change the default text and background colors, all things which everybody to some extent uses, and is certainly of particular benefit to the people who use assistive technologies, and also people who don't actually use assistive technologies but want to bump up the font size because they're a 50-year-old middle-aged guy like me who wears glasses. This is all changing what the developer intended to serve me as the user. My browser acts on my behalf. It's a user agent. This is a map of UK, and I've marked Nottingham on it. This is a bloke called Mark Nottingham. Good guy, comes out of Australia, I think. He was on the W3C TAG, that's the Technical Architecture Group. Now he's a big noise in the Internet Architecture Board and the IETF. And he blogged a couple of weeks ago about a new RFC that he wrote. RFC 8890, the Internet is for end users. And in his blog, he wrote a little bit about why he wrote this RFC. When a decision improves the Internet for end users in one jurisdiction, but at the cost of potential harm to others elsewhere, that is not a good trade-off. As such, we effectively design the Internet for the pessimal environment. I didn't know the word pessimal, but it's the opposite of optimal. And I've got a degree in English, so there. So at its heart, The internet is for end users as a call for IETF, that's the Internet Engineering Task Force participants, to stop pretending that they can ignore the non-technical consequences of their decisions, a call for broader consultation when making them, and one for continued focus on the end user. Ultimately, end user impact is as least as important as the technical considerations of a proposal. This very much echoes the HTML design principles, the priorities of constituencies, which reads from memory: favor users over developers, over browser developers, over spec writers, over philosophical purity. There's Mark Nottingham's blog for you. At the end of his article on Did the Early Internet Pioneers Get It Wrong, Godwin says, when ordinary people are empowered to come together and work on a common humanity benefiting project like Wikipedia, unexpectedly great and positive things can happen. Wikipedia is not the anomaly my journalist friend thinks it is. Instead, it's a promise of the good works ordinary people freed by the internet can create. And this I've bolded and reddened because I think it's very, very important. Godwin continues, I no longer argue primarily that the explosion of freedom of expression and diverse voices facilitated by the internet is simply a burden we dutifully have to bear. Now, more than I ever did 30 years ago, I argue that it's the solution. What do you think, stock photography models? Well, stock photography models are holding up a banner saying education, not regulation. I don't have the same complete faith that Godwin has in the wisdom of the crowd, but I think there's a lot to be done to educate people. I think it's no coincidence that the genocide of the Rohingya people in Myanmar was able to happen with a population who were not accustomed to the internet. They hadn't yet understood that because something was in black and white, it didn't carry the authority of a book. And I think that there's a great deal of education to be done to make people understand that social media is media and not an encyclopedia. Media, not encyclopedia. Just made that up, and it's quite good poetry. Or, as I said to my kids, there they are, when they were little, I said to them, you have to remember that the internet, the web, is a mechanism of communication, not information. And just because somebody puts something on a website doesn't mean it's true, doesn't mean they've thought it through. And certainly I see with younger people that they do tend to be able to be more critical of what they read because they've been exposed to this babel, this cacophony of competing voices. But there's a huge amount of education that still needs to be done for older people, for people in countries where the internet is coming on now, and in schools throughout the United Kingdom, in critical thinking, in looking for cited credible sources, for looking at who seems authoritative and who is, mad anti-vax cretin 273 at hotmail.com. There's a great deal of this that needs to be done in all sectors. But I really hope that we don't regulate the internet. I really hope that we don't regulate social media. I really hope that social media stops its horrendous land grab to turn everywhere into prudish California. And I really hope that that court case in Germany, which was adjourned on August the 18th and will be heard next year, I really hope that that doesn't stop our user agents working for us. When that court case restarts, I shall blog about it and make a noise about it and hope that you will join with me in in lobbying the courts. Because fundamentally, the internet is not computers. The web is not clouds. The web is not a series of tubes. The web is these women in an African village. The web is this blind chappie in Toronto. The web is these women on a bus I photographed in Bangladesh. The web is this elderly lady in a wheelchair in Taipei. The web is this young gentleman on the metro in New York. The web is this Cambodian farmer and his granddaughter that I met when I was on holiday there. The web is, as Sir Uncle Timbo said, for everyone, and we need to keep it open, keep it free, and keep our browsers working for us. Thanks and snogs, actually no, thanks and elbow bumps. I'm Bruce Lawson, Bruce L on the Twitters, brucelawson.co.uk. Other Bruce Lawsons are available, and warning, I've been known to cause nausea in some jurisdictions. And that's all I have for you. I hope I wasn't overly incoherent. I hope I've given you some food for thought. And I hope that if you are one of those people who is more offended by nipples than Nazis, that you have a good hard look at yourself in the mirror. Kisses. Thank you.
Thank you, Bruce. That was a great talk, and I really appreciate you again coming in to do that at the literal last minute.
Oh, you silver-tongued devil, Rosie. But
We'll
thank
go
you.
with that. That's what we're going to say. I'm not sharing my video, which is good for me to start doing now, so I can toss it over to Hitty. Do we have any questions?
Yeah, I have one question, which is, should you be offered to take on the Facebook CEO position for a year, what would you do? And you would also be the controlling shareholder and chairman like the current CEO is.
I would I would invest a great deal more money in human moderators of content for, you know, terrorist incitement, out and out incitements to violence, etc. The trouble is with big tech, and there's few techs bigger than Facebook, is that they think that every human problem can be solved with more big tech. And in the same way, as I've been doing today, running automated tests on websites to check their accessibility can't work perfectly, because fundamentally you're looking at human problems and throwing big tech at it. You need humans to look at it. And I believe at Facebook, they only had one Burmese speaker or reader moderating content for the whole nation. And I would stop with the prudishness. It really, really gets on my nerves. Not just because I'm 9 and boobs make me laugh, but because there are people culturally whose women do go topless, and to censor them doing what they in their culture is perfectly legitimate is just cultural imperialism from a bunch of bedwetting Californians. So there's Zuck, you're a bedwetting Californian. Next. God, I'm going to get so sued for this.
And on that's a great answer. I think they should hire you. MBE on YouTube asked, don't you want to take the user agency out of the user agent? I'm not sure if I understand what exactly they're meaning there.
No, not at all. I mean, your user agent has many options. So I used to work for Opera and Opera Mini because it was used by people, and still is used by hundreds of millions of people in places where bandwidth is not only tightly constrained, but also phenomenally expensive. There's an option not to show images or to show very low res image. Now you, well, not you, Hida, because you're a responsible sort of chappie who doesn't do evil, but let's assume an evil person. Let's call him Adrian, just for the sake of argument. You're vomiting down a massive 2 megabyte hero image of, you know, your CEO and his attractive beard. And an Opera Mini user that might be 10% of their monthly data allowance taken up by that. So they can press a button on and say, don't show me images, and they get the content. This is your agency telling the user agent to work for you. And don't forget, I know people have heard me say this millions of times, but in order to afford 500 megabytes of mobile broadband a month, you have to work for 1 hour in Germany at average wage. You have to work for 6 hours in the US at average wage to afford the same. You have to work for 28 hours in Nigeria and 32 hours in Brazil. So your decisions are costing users money, making them work harder, and it's just rude. And so they have a right to say, no, charming though your CEO is, attractive though your work ping pong table and fish tank and beer fridge are, I don't want to pay to see them. Next.
So Max Buck is asking, should web literacy be taught in schools, part of the curriculum?
Should what be taught in school, sorry?
Web literacy.
Absolutely, absolutely. They make us sit, when I was a kid, they made us sit through endless amounts of religious education. What is a more useful life skill? I would argue knowing how to sort the nutters from the sensible people on the web is far more useful. Next, any marriage proposals yet?
I am afraid we don't have any of those.
I don't know why I bothered coming on then.
Only from me, Bruce. Patrick, yeah.
Okay, do we have to fight over proposing to Bruce?
Well, the answer is yes to all of you. Polyamory is the new thing.
Nice. Well, for our viewers, well, first of all, Bruce, thank you very much again, especially with the last minute thing.
My pleasure. Thank you to all the people who've given their time to organise this. I was really busy at work today, so I couldn't watch it, but I will be looking at the YouTube. So, to all the sponsors, all the partners, and all the team who've organised it, on behalf of the whole community, thank you.
Thank you. To our viewers, if you liked this session, hit that YouTube like button, and don't forget you can subscribe at youtube.com/inclusivedesign24 to be kept in the loop for our future events and the remaining sessions for the day.
Wow, you're such a YouTuber.
It happens.
Don't forget to hit like, hit the subscribe.
It's a shiny, happy button. You want to hit it. A reminder that Inclusive Design 24 is brought to you with thanks to Barclays Access, Adobe, Intopia, Tetralogical, InfoAxia, Intuit, WebAble, DQ Systems, and Adrian Roselli, LLC. Inclusive Design 24 will be back on the hour with our next session. Hitty DeFries will be co-hosting. I will be gone. I'm probably going to sleep. Again, thank you to Bruce, and we will see you shortly.